The other night I was watching a documentary about Bobby Kennedy, RFK. After his brother's assassination, he completely changed. As those who knew him best attested, he developed an empathy that had been sorely lacking before. And empathy especially for those who were marginalized and oppressed, exact opposite of his very privileged background. As a result, he spent significant time with people living in deep poverty, in particular Appalachia, which at the time was probably the poorest region of the country. He came away from that experience profoundly moved and eventually decided to run for president in 1968. His campaign, like none before or since, captivated America with the hope that it would finally fulfill its promise, that it would finally become the land of justice and equality for all that it promised to be. In one of the documentary's most vivid scenes, it captures the night that Martin Luther King was assassinated. Bobby was out on the campaign trail and had to deliver an impromptu speech pleading for peace. He spoke from the heart with raw emotion about how his loved one, his brother, had been killed by a white man too. His words that night breathed hope into despair. They breathed calm into a grieving nation that was on the brink of violent upheaval. But in one of the cruelest twists of fate ever, just 2 short months later, Bobby himself was assassinated, and all that hope swelling around him died too. The saddest scene of the documentary was the funeral train, the procession of Bobby's body from New York to Washington. Thousands lined the tracks, paying their final respects, mourning not only for the man, but also for the vision of America he articulated. RFK was the third major figure, third leader gunned down by an assassin in that decade. And just as with MLK and JFK, Americans agonized over what might have been. If Bobby had lived, America certainly would be a far different place, as many argue, a much better place. He probably would have put an end to the Vietnam War sooner. He would have prevented the Nixon presidency with the Watergate fiasco. He would have probably enacted significant social justice reforms, and on and on. Throughout the years, many Americans couldn't help but wonder, what if? What if Bobby had lived? What if MLK or JFK had lived? What if there was some way that they could come back from the dead and finish what they started? See, that question points to something striking about the Christian claim about the resurrection. It points to the astonishing and absolute uniqueness of this claim. There are plenty of people that we would like to see return from the dead to finish what they started. JFK, MLK, RFK, Elvis, to name a few. And if the claim could be credibly made that they had come back, it would. But it can't. It's only in the case of Jesus where that claim is ever seriously entertained. Only in the case of Jesus where there's enough evidence for the case to go forward. No sane person would ever dare claim that anyone else had come back from the dead. There's just absolutely no evidence to sustain it. Why isn't this claim made more often? Of course, there are those who claim to have seen people in the immediate wake of their deaths. There are rare instances of those kinds of sightings. Usually it's a loved one. Sometimes it's a complete stranger. But these examples only prove the point. Because you see, in not one of these cases does the person claim that the deceased is no longer in the grave. Their body most certainly is. In not one of these cases does the person claim that the deceased has been raised from the dead in some kind of permanent and tangible way. These are fleeting encounters that never repeat themselves. In not one of these cases does the person claim that the deceased has now been glorified, transformed to the transcendent sphere. It would be laughable for someone to make such claims. But this is precisely what makes the Christian claim so utterly unique in the annals of history. Jesus' disciples did claim that his body was no longer in the tomb. They did claim that he had been raised from the dead and appearing to multiple people on multiple occasions in a permanent and tangible way. They did claim that he now had a glorified body that had somehow been transformed to the transcendent sphere, that exhibited transcendent qualities. It'd be laughable to claim that Elvis had come back from the dead. No Elvis fan making that claim would ever stake their life on it or reorient their worldview around it. The same applies, as much as we might hope it would be different, to people like RFK, MLK, and JFK, and anybody else who's ever lived, with one notable exception. And it's Karl Rahner, who is perhaps the most brilliant theologian of the 20th century, once pointed out, the fact that this claim can't be immediately dismissed as laughable means that the evidence, in all probability, most likely, is actually good enough to be true. How so? How can he make that statement? Because for such an outrageous claim as this, that somebody has come back from the dead, to actually have some credence, to actually have people take it seriously enough to argue and debate about it, means that it must be substantial enough to overcome the fact that it runs counter to all our accumulated human experience with death and its dreadful finality. In other words, the threshold for this claim is so extraordinarily high that just the fact people would actually entertain it, would actually argue and debate about it, means that the evidence has to be that good. Why isn't this claim made more often? The most likely reason, most probable reason, is that in the case of Jesus, it actually did happen. If you would like to see more videos like this, please go to the Raising Jesus Facebook page and like it so that we can keep you updated on future videos, blogs, and announcements. And if you want to contact me directly, you can go to the website, Raising Jesus website, the Contact DJ page, and leave your comments and questions there. I would love to hear from you.